You're listening to the Broadway Podcast Network.
I do a lot of zagging when people zig, because like there's opportunity to zig if you're on the early wave of zigging, but at some point zig isn't cool anymore and it's like, I want to go see some zag.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Was It Chance, the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. I'm Heather Vickery.
And I'm Alan Seals. And Heather and I started off as two perfect strangers who met by chance at PodcastMovement. And
Where we are right now
and embraced opportunity. Listen in as we chat with other successful people about the risks they've taken to put themselves on a path to creative success.
That's good.
Yeah, just close my
Good
laptop.
intro.
I am freewheeling
We don't know the intro. We've only done it a lot of times.
It's a crutch.
And we still have to read it.
It's a crutch.
Well, I need to read it to read the bio, but I'm gonna do a good job. I think.
I'm going to be looking at you in the eyes as you do it.
Oh, that's no pressure at all, friend. I was first introduced to
Nope, I'm keeping that in. I'm keeping it.
To Jay's guest.
I was first introduced.
You want some ass water? She asked if we wanted fresh ass
Fancy.
water. Fancy ass water.
ass water.
I want some fancy ass water.
Okay, but so
Okay, go
listen,
ahead, go
I
ahead.
got a
Intro.
gift
Give us the
basket
intro.
when I got here, and
Yeah.
I got a bottle of Voss water. And if you know water, Voss is really fancy water. And our guest today, who I haven't even introduced yet because you keep interrupting me,
Oh, it's all my
asked
fault.
for some water, and I said I got some fancy ass water, and then Ellen had to make an ass water joke.
What makes
so-
water fancy, though? Is it fancy branding, or is there
That's
actually
my
something
question.
about the water?
Like, it's all H2O when you get down. If you zoom in far enough, it's H2O. What makes it fancy ass water?
It's actually very hard to read the ingredients in a clear bottle.
It's white text on a clear
I'm pretty
bottle.
sure it's branding.
I think it is, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that bottle of water costs like $6 or $7. It's obscene.
What a great business.
I know, right?
It's been blessed.
How did we not? We're all creatives.
The factory
And none of us thought of bottling water.
burns
Okay,
sage.
stop talking.
Mm.
I was first introduced to today's guest on Twitter. Clouse has a natural ability to connect and inspire folks. Professionally, he helps people become professional creators. And if you are like me, you want to know what that means. Because I know Jay, and I don't even know what that means. He is the writer of Creator Science and the host of Creative Elements, a narrative interview podcast exploring how today's top creators make a living with their art and creativity. He's previously led the community experience team for Pat Flynn, which is very cool, and Smart Passive Income. He's also the creator of the highly successful Tweet 100 Challenge. And just this morning, I heard him shout my name across the Podcast Movement Expo Hall.
Heather!
And I got to give him a real life hug, and that was cool. And it's always so fun and weird to meet someone that you know virtually for the first time and feel like you're already friends.
Yeah.
So, Jay, welcome to Was It Chance?
Yeah, this is fun.
Welcome.
This is fun. so
Wait,
far.
am I allowed to talk?
You're allowed to talk
Okay.
now.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Honored to be here. Back on our topic of water, though. Do you guys ever think about the water cycle? Like, talk about a cool natural phenomenon. It's unbelievable that like all the water that ever was is all the water that ever will be. It just cycles through different states of matter. It's crazy.
Energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
Right.
And water. No, it's
That's
insane.
fascinating.
It's insane to me. Like, what was it? I was looking on Reddit last night, and someone was talking about like, it was on the Facepalm subreddit. Are you a Redditor?
I'm not a Redditor.
Well,
I'm
there-
not either.
Facepalm is one of my favorite subreddits because it's just people standing behind atrocious claims of really stupid things. And one of them was like, did you know that if the planet moved 10 feet in either direction, all the water would boil or freeze and the world would be inhospitable? And people were like, actually, the orbit is not perfectly circular. It's an oval, and we go like hundreds of miles in it, science. And then the response to that was, don't tell me I'm wrong in my own post. Like, that was the facepalm. I was like, all right, well, yeah. They're not a creative person.
But Jay is.
But Jay is. Tell us
So-
about Tweet 100 because
Oh, you're just going to go right into Tweet 100?
well, that's what
Okay, go on.
that's where I know him the most.
I know.
from.
I invited you to
right,
Tweet 100.
you did. I want to know about Tweet 100, and then we'll back up and get into the origin of the creativity.
Well, a little bit about the way my brain works. I have
I see the smoke coming out of your ears. Yeah.
I have a crippling fear of public failure. And so if I need to motivate myself,
Wow.
what I will do is create a situation where I can fail publicly, and then I won't. So Tweet 100 exists, and for those uninitiated, it's a free 100-day challenge so that I encourage you to publish one tweet per day on Twitter, something you're proud of. There's a little bit of a no-code leaderboard so you can see if you've done it, and it gives you a tally of your overall success rate over a 100-day period. And I wanted to just create a system where I would encourage myself to tweet something good once a day, because I knew when I did that, I saw success of getting in front of new people and more email subscribers and just generally expanding my reach. And so I built a system where I could publicly fail so that I wouldn't.
That's insane.
Like, how do you guarantee the not doing because you embrace the doing? How do you guarantee the not failing because you embrace the failing?
I'm just a big fan of understanding your neurology so that you can hack it. Because I think it's just kind of a puzzle, and everyone works a little bit differently, and you can figure out your own quirks and compensate for them by preying on your own fears and insecurities, I guess.
Yeah, I'm here for that. I mean, that's my whole work, is embracing your fears.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's professionally, that's what I do. It worked really well. And you did not go gently into that good night. Like, you built a intense software. In fact,
I did. Yeah.
I did a challenge, and I think you said to me, I don't necessarily encourage you to do it the way I did it.
That's my advice to everyone on everything. Because people will see something I do and they're like, how did you do this? I'm like, well, are you willing to like pixel push and like screw around? The first 2 days here at Podcast Movement, I had this vision in my mind. I was like, I need a little button that pops up that allows you to scroll to top on my website. And I spent like 5 hours here at Podcast Movement making that work, even though I don't know code. Because like I love little problems like that. And I want little flourishes on top of all the things that I do, which requires like a lot of weird, tedious details and work. So yeah, I do not recommend most of the time that people do things the way that I do them, because it's incredibly time intensive and it takes away from other things that matter, frankly.
Where did the crippling fear of failure come from?
Probably a place of ego.
Like, have you failed big before and it was like an embarrassing experience, or just the fear of not going through it developed and snowballed over time?
That's a good question. I mean, if we really want to psychoanalyze me, I think it's probably that I have high expectations of what I'm capable of, and I don't like to fall short of them, and I don't want other people to see me fall short of them. And it's probably rooted in something with my childhood, where like all I wanted to do in high school was be a great football player, and felt like I could never achieve that, and just never was able to feel good about all the hard work I was putting in. And you know, as I've gotten older, I've realized that I often hide from situations where I will look bad because I don't want people to see me look bad. But like, we all start as bad at everything.
Absolutely.
So is it just like, am I never going to acquire new skills again? Or am I going to do it in the quiet, in the dark? And I usually do that a lot. It's like I'll go into a cave and I'll learn something until I feel confident enough to show that in front of people. And then I'll show it in front of people. But I still have that fear of like just not performing.
It's really fascinating. I mean, it's definitely a perfectionist issue. I'm listening and I'm like, I don't show up and do things that I don't know how to do. Like, somebody must do that somewhere. But
kids, constantly.
We beat that out of them, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
God, that's depressing.
I try to do that. Like, if there's a challenge. What were you saying about the personality types at dinner the other night, where it was like taking here and here and here and here and merge them all together, and here's your solution? Like, that's exciting.
Are you talking about human design?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know anything about human design?
No.
So I'm getting certified in human design. It's there are a lot of things at play. It's astrology, the ancient Chinese I Ching, Buddhism, chakras, all of that. And there are 5 different human design types. And if you want later, when we're not recording, I can pull your human design type. I would bet anything you're a generator, but we'll find out. This guy's a generator.
Yeah.
But what's been interesting. So if we're talking about perfectionism and failure, I'm what's called a projector. And I am designed to be more successful when I rest consistently. I got about 3 hours of hardcore work in me at a time before I absolutely have to take a break. And so my fear, my limiting voice has always been around, Heather, you lazy fuck, you don't work hard enough.
Yeah.
Why don't you? Everybody else is working so hard. Jay's working all the time. Alan's working why can't you work all the time? What is wrong with you? And learning this about myself, that I'm innately designed this way. And there's a lot more to it. This is very just surface level. I've been able to go, oh, because that's what makes me good. So there's some freedom in knowing about ourselves. Anyway, let's go back. What is it? What is a creator to you?
Yeah. When I use the term creator, I'm talking mostly about online content creators.
Okay.
I mean, it's a very expansive term. Even in the way I'm describing it, it's pretty expansive. But I'm talking about online content creators, people who create digital assets. Could be products, could just be like information, could be a blog post, could be podcasts, could be videos. People who create digital assets for the purpose of creating value for an end consumer and also capturing some of that value for themselves.
How did you get there?
Good question. It's been kind of a meandering path. I mean, the blunt, honest answer is I fell in love with entrepreneurship, but I had a very limited view of what entrepreneurship was. I thought it was high-tech growth startups, and I did that for the first few years of my career. And then I discovered freelancing, and I was like, oh, well, that's also entrepreneurship. That's pretty cool. I'm going to do that for a while. And then as I was doing more of that, I discovered online courses and the model that is like being a digital creator. And finally, that felt like it just fit so well, because the thing that drew me to tech was I was a product guy. So I loved being able to see a problem in the wild, design a solution that served users, and then make that thing actually be real. In the tech world, that was through working with engineers and designers, and at the end of it, there was like all kinds of compromises that were put on the thing, and it was no longer my vision. And it was always kind of a bummer, because it's like this perfect idyllic thing in my mind had to go through other people to become real, and it never came out the other side as my vision. In the creator world, I have the ability to create the things that I envision myself. Like there's no one to blame but me for any compromises or any changes. And so it's been just so cozy and nice. And on that journey, I found that I have a unique ability to identify trends and patterns and synthesize and contextualize things for people. So as I'm kind of learning the ropes, a lot of people are like, hey, how are you doing that? And so I just started teaching it to people, and that was just kind of the start of it.
I love that about you. You create out loud.
Yeah.
And I think because you two are Alan and Jay are very similar, but Alan is like, hey, dumbass, why don't you already know how to do this? And I don't mean that insultingly, but you're so high level tech. Like you think of things and you're like, how do you not know what, like what? And Jay's like, I don't know how to do this. So I'm going to do it really publicly. And I'm going to show you how I learned how to do it.
Then it
Right. I get it. I see it. But it's fascinating to watch you do that. And people just flock to it.
I mean, it's helpful. It's helpful to people. I think a lot of people build businesses on obfuscating some of the things that they're learning and doing and the truth behind it, because they think it's kind of their secret sauce. And then they sell the dream of doing that thing and not like the actual, recipe. So it just feels like there's a lot of limitations for people who are trying to learn this stuff. And I genuinely do want to like teach and share as much as I can openly, because honestly, the best outcome for a lot of people who start following my work is that they realize, oh, I'm not willing to make the sacrifices or the trade-offs or put the time in to do this. And it's like, great. I hope I saved you 2 years.
I suspect we are very similar. So I suspect that throughout all of this, though, so you're holding yourself accountable by doing it publicly, so you will continue and not fail. But then when you get there, when you're done, is there still that element of, well, it wasn't really good enough, so I'm going to keep on going?
Sometimes I've gotten in a really good routine of done is the finish line I optimize for, and good enough is the requirement.
Yes.
But once it's shipped, I iterate on it constantly. Like I'm constantly improving tiny, almost inconsequential things.
Is that self-sabotage?
I don't think so. But I mean, because it's not preventing me from actually achieving the goal. Like the first goal is done and shipped in a functional, useful way. I think that that iteration work is actually what slowly over time has given me an advantage, because it just makes my work stand out.
Well, that's going back to the development mentality. It's launch and iterate, right? Yeah. Like you're doing design sprints.
Yeah.
And that's where I've had conflict with other collaborators, because there's some people I work with that are very much like, well, I need to know these are all our ingredients. Here's what it's going to look like. And we can't tell anyone about it until it's exactly at the end. And I'm like, but without user feedback, how are we going to make it what they need?
Yeah.
Or what, so it's kind of like this compromise, right? So do you find that, do you prefer to work by yourself in that sort of respect? Or is it helpful for you to have that sort of opposed way of thinking?
I do tend to, I'm an introvert, so I do tend to like want to make stuff in a dark corner somewhere. But then I slowly start socializing with people and hearing the feedback. I'm very open to feedback as much as it still hurts me. I smile, I say thank you, I sit with it, I sift through it, and then I make changes based on that. So I am constantly like doing that cycle, but I like to get my initial vision, belief as like the done point, and then I kind of iterate off of that. Because like I said, with my initial issues with development, if I was going into user feedback too early, I think I would end up with something that I'm not interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And in this creator world, the only thing I know for certain is it's a long game. And the only way to continue playing the game is to be doing things that are sustainable, making sustainable choices for you. And if I'm not interested in something, it's not going to be sustainable.
Yes.
Well, how do you keep it interesting then? Because if YouTube is always changing their algorithm, and you're hearing that Instagram is promoting Reels so they can compete with TikTok, and TikTok's going to take over the world in a good way or it's a bad way, and Facebook's on the way out unless you're a grandma, like, or just my mom. Where are you? I mean, there's so much to keep track of. Where are you putting your focus? And I guess, is it just sitting down and like, are you doom scrolling all day when you're not writing code?
Oh, no.
Or like, where do you pull this in?
I don't consume all that much. I think the information that you are willing to take in is very important and precious. So I rarely am like going through a feed of anything. I spend a lot of time making stuff because I have like I call them creative commitments, stuff that I've decided I will ship on some regular basis. And usually for me, it's weekly. So every week I'm putting out 2 newsletters, one of them being very editorial. I'm putting out a podcast, which is also a YouTube video. And just that at a minimum, let alone whatever I put out onto social media, which is generally 1 to 2 posts a day per platform. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole lot. To keep it interesting, I'm just trying to make sure that, again, I'm making choices that are mostly for my interests. Because it's really easy, especially in my world, because I'm interviewing creators all the time, creators that are doing exceptionally well. And you talk to enough people who are, 200,000 followers on LinkedIn, you see the patterns, you see the playbook. And I could do that, but it's not me. So to what degree am I willing to compromise that? There's a certain amount of compromise that would make it no longer interesting to me, which means it's not sustainable, which means it's not good. So I find myself, the tension I have innately all the time is I see playbooks for growth that I could do, but it wouldn't be me, it wouldn't be interesting, and it's at the expense of speed of growth.
Playbooks for growth. That's an interesting...
No, but I resonate with that really well because you're right. You're like, well, I know I could do all of these things and I could get that result. And I just don't fucking want to.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel good to me. And it's so nice to actually hear somebody say that because they're always pushing the follow the dream playbook. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. And there's just so much more life to live in doing the things that you stay connected to. And you'll get the result you want anyway. It doesn't have to be.
I do think it's a long-term better business strategy too, because it's going to make you stand out. It's going to make you different. I do a lot of zagging when people zig, because like there's opportunity to zig if you're on the early wave of zigging, but at some point zig isn't cool anymore, and it's like I want to go see some zag.
But I really like that because giving people permission to not follow the pack, to not follow the playbook, but I'm sure that you take what you want from the playbook. Like, let me try this part. I'll try that part, right? And you don't have to follow the whole thing. All right, y'all, we're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
23-year-old Walt Mendez finally got his dream job, working in show business. The only problem is his new boss, a low-level talent agent with rageaholic tendencies.
You're a nice person, Walt. That's going to be a problem. So listen, whatever your impulse is, do the opposite.
When she has a heart attack on his first day, Leaving him alone, clueless and in charge, he discovers some questionable financial dealings led by her dentist husband.
I'm literally doing root canals on anything with insurance.
And he turns to his ruthless predecessor for advice.
Walt, grow a pair. You're in the Hunger Games.
Soon, his shady ex-boyfriend resurfaces, coming on strong and making the job suddenly more attractive.
Am I making you nervous?
A little.
And it's turning you on, isn't it?
All heard through his headset at the office, Rolling Calls is a hilarious dark comedy starring Julie Halston, Richard Kind, Dan Rosales, Matt Doyle, Wesley Taylor, Luis Miranda, Aaron Davey, Brittany Mack, Andrea Macassette, and more. Get ready for Rolling Calls at bpn.fm/Rolling Calls or everywhere you listen to podcasts.
And we're back. Where do communities fit in this for you? So very brilliantly, in my opinion, you took this Tweet 100 community that you built and you were like, oh, hey guys, let's get together. And it's morphed drastically just in the last, 6-8 months?
Yeah, probably 5 months.
5 months? Has it been? I don't know. It's been a long year. How does that fit in to what you're doing?
Well, this is actually a really good example in microcosm. So did Tweet 100. From the beginning, people were like, we should have a community for this. And I thought, I'm not interested. That's a lot of work.
Community of what?
People. Like they wanted a digital community space where the people going through this experience could interact solely that group of people.
Gotcha.
And I could see a use case for that. But I was also still at the time working full time with Pat. And I didn't have the space for it. As the original cohort of people who joined in early were reaching the end, I realized I got to have some sort of next step for these people. They're going to be like, we did it, now what? And by that time I was out on my own, and I was thinking that I wanted to create a community of some sort. So I thought, now's the time. I'll launch a community for folks in Tweet 100. We started it. The people who joined were awesome. But personally, I was not interested in talking about Twitter all day, every day.
Right.
It's a small part of what I'm doing.
Right.
So I began to not engage with that community to the standard that I would hold myself to. And I realized I crave community and I want to build a community, but I want it to be more holistic for creators. So Tweet 100 actually evolved into what is now the Lab, which is a community for creators who are really trying to become professional creators, which I would say as rewarding them financially for the effort they're putting into this enterprise. And it's pretty holistic. And it's also pretty expensive, to be honest. It's got a high bar for people to join because it's not for people who are early stage or aspiring or kicking the tires. I wanted to meaningfully work with a small number of people where I could help them move the needle. And that's been just perfect because it's perfectly built to what I'm interested in helping people do. It's curating for the type of people that I want to work with. And it's economically structured in a way where I can really justify putting a lot of time into it, which most people with communities just don't have. They haven't thought through that well enough.
Have you been able to learn and integrate into your teachings and your courses and your trend watching? Like when you work with different people, has there been anything that surprised you that you've been like, oh, I didn't see that before. This person does it really well. I'm going to pull this into
all the time.
The rest of the course.
Happens all the time. The most recent episode of my podcast was with Kat Norton. She's known as Miss Excel on Twitter and on TikTok and Instagram. She dances with Excel functions, she's like showing you how to learn Microsoft Excel above her head.
That's awesome. There's a job for everything.
She has like 860,000 followers on TikTok.
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to start dancing and putting that above my head. That's not the thing I took from her. The thing that I took from her, and I think you'll appreciate this, Heather.
No, okay.
The biggest thing that she worries about and thinks about and plans her day around for her content is she believes that every piece of content you create is just energy transmission. And she's like, if you are in a negative headspace or you're doubting this thing or you're not excited about what you're making, the people on the other end of the phone are going to feel that. And I'm like 40% woo-woo, so I'm like kind of into it, but I can't argue with her results.
No, I agree. And yet, so we'll pull in an improv, yes. And I also think there's a lot of power in authenticity when you are a public creator. If we pretend we're happy and everything's danceable all the time, it feels unrealistic.
It's not about pretending. It's like, if I am not currently in a headspace to make this good,
She just doesn't
Then
make
don't
it.
do it.
I'm not going to do it.
All right.
It's
fair
like
enough.
she organizes her days so that she'll be in a good mood by the time it's time to create something. And I
That's
buy into
interesting.
that because I often am really just like stressed out by deadlines,
Yeah.
and creating something to hit a deadline that transmit that stress or that like feeling of got to get something out isn't going to be very effective.
Move the goalpost.
How do you balance that? But like the stress of deadlines, the anxiety of public failure with maintaining the positive headspace to create positively and continue every day.
It's really tough. I don't have a great answer. I mean, for me, the best way that I can try to get there is to be ahead of schedule.
Yes.
Oh, that feels so good.
Yes.
And inbox zero.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ahead of schedule. And you know, you're on your own. You make the schedule also.
I do, but the question becomes if I'm on time or a little bit behind schedule, how do I become ahead of schedule?
Yeah.
And it's either declaring bankruptcy for a period of time or just powering through it.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody that chooses to power through it like 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And again, I don't recommend that for most people because I got shingles 2 weeks before our wedding.
Oh shit.
Was
Oh,
that
no.
probably
Was it
partially
stress-induced?
stress-induced?
Yeah.
Probably. And was the wedding some of that stress? Absolutely. But like part of it was we have a wedding, we have a week off, we have a 2-week honeymoon. I have a 4-month or a 4-week period of time where I'm not making stuff. I better do that now. So powering through it just isn't sustainable for most people, and they're not willing to make that trade-off. So again, I wouldn't recommend you take my path.
Wow. So to talk about, you know, intentional risk, I feel like your public building, your public putting yourself out there to fail, that, I mean, to me, that is your intentional risk. Is that,
For sure.
do you have any other, like, can you remember a time maybe early in your life or early in your career where you're like, I'm going to try this really risky thing and it turned out great?
I mean, I haven't done anything professionally that wasn't fairly risky.
Yeah.
Maybe last year working with Pat. Yeah, building in public is a risky thing to some degree, but I'll be honest, like I think when you're good at building in public, you're better at showing positive momentum. Like it's not about I'm not going to show everything in public. I'm still curating what I'm building in public.
Right, of course.
I'm showing mostly progress, momentum, wins, lessons learned, sure. But if something doesn't perform, I'm not going to be. I often don't say like, "Here's where this tanked."
Why not?
Just because I don't see as big of an upside. Sometimes I do, but most things that tank aren't even interesting tanks.
Okay.
If it's something where it's like, oh, here's an insight that I think is pretty novel that I took from this thing tanking, awesome, I will do that for sure. But most of the time it's like, well, I was hoping 20 people would buy this and 13 did.
Oh, and it's not like a big failure. It just didn't.
Yeah, it's not a big
go the way
failure.
you
It's like
wanted.
it's not a fork in the road. It's not that interesting. All it's doing is saying like, well, maybe Jay's not as good, as like successful as we thought he was.
Lies.
Which doesn't, yeah, but perception is reality.
Sure.
So
Sure.
another example of this is I've been doing these $40 paid workshops for the last 2 years or so. They're always like very specific in what their outcome is. I've done one on email newsletters. I've done one on community building. I've done one on freelancing. My community building crash course was the most successful of these workshops by far. And it was because I put on Twitter like a short thread that I'm doing this thing. People on Twitter were like, this is awesome. And then people would screenshot that they purchased it and tweet it. And I was like, cool. And I'd retweet that. And I'd be like, hey, look, Heather's on board.
Yeah.
And then someone else would be like, oh, cool. And then they would do that. And I retweet that. And I'm like, Alan's on board too. And that public momentum is really what a lot of build in public can be for people. Now, I don't want everybody to just be doing momentum marketing.
Right.
I want them to be doing some true building in public, but a lot of my build in public is momentum marketing.
I love it. And I crack myself up when I fully know I'm quote unquote falling for it too. And you are one of a standout reminder of that. When you first did the Tweet 100, you did the, like, it's so cliche, and I'm not harsh on you because it worked and I did it. You're like, the first 10 people will get
Yeah.
50% off. And I was like, man, I have been doing this for 100 motherfucking days. Like, I want in.
Well, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. So I have no problem about doing that because I'm very intentional about rewarding people who take early risk with me.
Yeah.
So your Tweet 100 membership became membership in the lab, which right now is $1,000 at a standard, like at a regular level. You paid $300.
I think I paid $150.
Oh, you paid $150.
I got it 50% off.
Yeah, you're right, because it was a $300 membership. You paid $150, 50% off, and you can have that rate for as long as you want to be a member.
And the other thing is, I did that. I wanted to be in, but I felt like I'd gotten a ton of value from you for free, and I was like, this guy deserves my $150.
Within the next 2 weeks, I'm raising the price to $1,500.
That's awesome.
And again, like, I just want to reward the people who take early risk with me. Like, I would never raise the price on people who are already paying something. It's like, you've got that locked in for forever. So I have no problem doing these, like, dropping of breadcrumbs or like creating some urgency, because ultimately that's going to serve you. If I do my job making something awesome, you're going to want to stick around. And I don't run discounts now where I'm giving people better prices than the people who have come before.
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
It lacks so much integrity.
Yeah.
Well, it's authenticity, and like you said, rewarding the people who were there first, who took chances, and that's brand loyalty. You're building your own brand loyalty that way.
You have a lot of brand, like, people trust you.
Well, I'm willing to be like pretty. The people that I serve are so in this world. Jedi mind tricks don't work. It's a lot easier to just be like, hey, I'm going to only open up 10 spots of this because otherwise you won't make a decision. I'm willing to call that out because people understand it anyway. So let me like be aware of your awareness, and people respect that, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just curious how you ended up, because you do have this really lovely long form newsletter, and you call yourself what is it?
Creator scientist?
Creator scientist, which is sexy. Like, I love that. Like, like, I get it. It makes sense to me. How did that come about? And also, man, how do you maintain that every week? It makes me tired to read it.
I mean, it's not as intense as you would think, because I build systems for things. So the newsletter was actually the first experiment in public failure. In 2017, I was working at a startup, and I had this limiting belief that I was not creative. I was an executor. I could take someone else's vision and make it real, but I didn't have creative ideas myself. And so I said, fuck that. I'm going to prove to myself that I am creative. And I'm going to do that by publishing a blog post every day. Again, the only way to get myself to do that was to have a degree of public failure. So I did it for a year, every day. And then
What'd you
that
write
became
about?
weekly. Mostly garbage. I mean, it was like whatever's on my mind.
Like anything.
It was
every
like
day.
it was like a 500 word Zanga post.
Oh, I remember Zanga.
Yeah, it was like that style. It wasn't on Zanga, but it was very much like I was trying to be Seth Godin, like that style of thing. And writing every day, like, I don't have a lot of great ideas. There weren't a lot of bangers in that. But it did build a muscle, and it did build trust in myself that when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And a lot of people don't trust themselves, and they compromise with themselves and talk themselves out of things and negotiate out of things. So I built that muscle then. The newsletter now is becoming a weekly thing. It's called Creator Science, and it's more along the same of, let me break down and analyze what creators are doing that is controllable, things you can learn from and apply. And it's kind of modular. So the top part of the newsletter is editorial. I'll have an article that I write. Then I'll typically have a sponsor of that newsletter, so they'll have a block. Then I'll have a block with the podcast episode that I published that week. Sometimes I'll put a couple of like things that I looked at, consumed, links that I think are worth passing along. And then I'll have just kind of a brief sign off.
I'm just thinking about tweeting every day is hard enough.
Well, I know. That's why he's not still writing a blog post every day.
Right. Well, that's a lot of words. And again, it goes back to, this has come up several times, is my own mental hang up about writing about myself. I'm like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to hear that.
It's not true.
Or my ideas aren't good enough. And I relate to that totally of I'm not creative. I can take other people's ideas and polish them and make them great. But that allows me not to fail because I'm taking somebody else's idea that's
you're
already
not
good.
taking an intentional risk when you do that.
Yeah.
Do you recall, like, you just seem to have such a natural willingness to take intentional risk. Were you born with it? Is there a pivotal moment where
Maybe
you're
it's
like,
Maybelline?
Maybe it's Maybelline. I don't think anyone's born with it. I think it's a practice skill.
I think some people are.
I think maybe, I don't know. I think it probably is more into the nurture side of things, and they had models growing up where they saw that, and they were given the space to fail when they were young. Because I think a lot of our aversion to failure comes from not being given the space, getting strong reactions from other people when we fail, people that we really want their approval when we're young. And we also are just ingrained with passing tests our entire childhood, or it's like there is a literal numeric bar of failure, which is like the worst thing you can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What was it with you? I heard something the other day that it was something about teaching, that instead of focusing on improving grades in children that are not doing well, I mean, obviously there's gray areas and exceptions, but instead of focusing on improving the grades that aren't good and focus on encouraging the grades that are, to move them into what they really love and what they're passionate and good at.
Yeah, so this goes back to, I'm certified in positive psychology, and there's a whole subset of positive psychology in character strengths. And the science shows that you should not try to get better at the things you suck at. You should use the things you're innately good at and rise up from there.
Yeah, so it was you that was telling me this,
Probably.
right? Yeah.
I've been talking about that for a long time. Now, that's harder when you're in school and you need grades to get into college. Like, you want to do all of these things, although I think our grading system is for shit. And I don't think, whether or not you're a good memorizer or a good test taker says whether you have value or importance in the world. But nobody really cares what I think about that. But yeah, as a coach, I'm constantly telling people, like, okay, first of all, are you actually not good at the things you think you're not good at? Because that may be bullshit. But what is your innate skill? What are your innate talents, and how can you build on that? And that kind of makes intentional risk a little easier, right? If you know you got a little skill there. Yeah,
and also, like, I'm in a very privileged position. Like, I'm a straight white male in the USA, and I've always had a feeling of some level of safety net. We don't come from a wealthy family by any means, but I know, like, if things got bad, I could go live with my parents or get some help somehow. So it's a lot easier to take intentional risk when it doesn't feel all that risky in the ultimate sense.
I think that's true. And then I also think there's another side of that where if you don't take intentional risk, you're going to have to stay in a space that doesn't feel acceptable. Like when we talk about people from really low income, I mean, I think this is how people get into, we'll call it illegal entrepreneurship, right? Like, I don't want to be sleeping on a dirt floor with rats crawling over me. I'm going to fucking do something different. So that innate desire to take a risk to change your situation, I think, it's there for everybody.
Oh, it's definitely there for everybody. I just feel like it was easier for me.
Sure.
What Heather was saying a second ago about leaning into things that you're good at, is that how you're approaching, like when you're coaching the other creatives and whatnot? Do you first look and say, all right, this is working, this isn't. Let's do more of the stuff that is versus improving the stuff that isn't.
Yeah, I'm getting increasingly brutal with my feedback because I realize that I have an eye for what's going to work and what's not going to work, or like what's really holding you back. And it's tough to hear because the people that I work with are creative people. They're artists or aspiring to be. And we are in a time when the bar is pretty high for what you have to do to stand out. And it doesn't serve them for me to play with the kid gloves and give them 50% of what they need to change when it takes 100% change to actually find success. So I do try to focus on looking at, okay, so what are you uniquely good at? And let's like turn that up to a 10. And not even just like right now, but I'm thinking increasingly more about what are your advantages that continued time in this space compounds your advantage so that as time passes and more entrants come into the field, they aren't surpassing you off the bat because they already have some unique advantage that you're not going to be able to catch.
Oh, I like that.
And that's tough. That's tough for people. It's tough for me because like that's earned insight that is hard earned over years.
But I think you package that really well because you are a nice guy and you're an approachable guy. I had a live session with you once and first of all, I was like, God, I walked away like, you fucking know that shit already, man. But you just said to me, you know that's not true. Do you remember that? I don't know. You talk to a lot of people like every day you do. But I gave you whatever my bullshit story was on whatever I couldn't launch my thing. And you were like, you know that's not true.
Yeah, because you're talking about like, well, I have all of these clients who have already paid me for something. I'm like, what are you talking about? That you can't just go to these people who have already paid you and ask them if they want to pay you for this other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciated it because I was like, all right, asshole, you know what you're supposed to do. And so just sometimes we need somebody on the outside to tell us the thing that we already know.
For sure.
All right, folks, one more quick break. All right, welcome back. You still with us? Here's the rest.
Consultants are great and coaches are wonderful and everybody needs some form
Is
of...
he about to insult us?
No, not at all. There's no but here. I'm just saying like the stuff that we have been talking about and the stuff that we learn on this podcast by interviewing people, every time we come out of one of these interviews and I'm always thinking to myself, yeah, I knew that already. Why didn't I act on it? Why didn't I act on it?
Why don't we do that?
Why don't we do that? And that's why I really love the concept of this podcast is like, just, all right, someone asks you to do something. Sure. If it makes sense and it's not hurting people, give it a shot. Right. Yeah. And so it's only happened in the last couple of years that really, like now in my late 30s, early 40s, that it's starting to kick in and be like, well, what have you really got to lose? And I wish what you're saying about compounding the knowledge, right? If I can impart this knowledge to the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, and say like, listen, you just got to do it because you got to learn from what doesn't work and take chances so that you can move forward faster.
I think there's a lot more space than people realize for being aspirational, where you don't have to say, well, what are my unique skills in this moment? You say, what are the unique skills that I want? And sure, those could and probably should play off your strengths. But the example I would give you is like, take Ryan Holiday, the author. He brought the idea of stoicism kind of back to modern interest. And anyone getting into that field now, talking about stoicism, they're not going to catch his level of knowledge in that space because there just weren't a lot of people doing it. And it didn't have to be when he did it. It could have been 10 years earlier. It could have been 10 years later. It wasn't so in the zeitgeist that there was a ton of competition right away. And now he's that guy, and his time spent in it is just continuing to compound and accrue to him because he made a choice of, this is something I have some interest in. I'm just going to become the guy for this, even though it's not like popular or sexy right now. I'm going to make it that. And I think a lot of people could do that for other subjects that aren't so timely. You know, like we get swept up in the cultural waves of interest of certain things, and people just begin saying, well, I'm going to hop on that train too. And there's probably a bunch of people having that thought. And chances are there's a lot of them who already have a natural advantage over you. When you pick some area that people aren't really focused on and say, I'm going to accrue a long-term compounding advantage here, that's really powerful. And you don't have to be as frenetic and manic about your timeline with it either, because like there just aren't other people playing in that space yet.
I guess, are you okay with not standing out? My original question was, how do you make sure you're always going to stand out? Because I feel like, case in point, we're here at Podcast Movement here in Dallas, and there are so many podcasters and so many speakers and presenters and people who've developed software and new gadgets and new ad systems and everything. And there's creators and everything. So when you look at the whole playing field, is it intimidating or encouraging?
Both. I mean, I've definitely had to check my ambition a little bit because I had always thought that I was like at the highest level of ambition. And so I would compare myself to like the one of one type people, like Mr. Beast, you know, or someone who's just like at the top of the mountain. And over the last couple of years, I've started looking more deeply into these people's actual lives. There was a really great profile on Ryan Seacrest a few months ago.
All right.
Ryan Seacrest, like incredibly prolific guy. Started on American Idol, but he has his like daily talk show that he was doing, like Kelly and Ryan, and they did this profile of him where they followed him around. He is scheduled every minute of every day.
I could not do that.
He has team members in his car with him who call the next stop they're stopping at and say, hey, Ryan's going to be there in 15 minutes. You guys going to be ready to go? He walks in, sits down, performs, gets back in the car and goes.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have kids. And I realized that a lot of these people at this level, they're making trade-offs that I'm just not willing to make.
Absolutely.
They're living places I'm not willing to live. They're traveling more than I'm willing to travel. They're not having family life at all. So I've had to look at what is my actual level of ambition and what can I actually expect in that way. And so I can't stand out by just being the biggest, right? It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. A better expectation is like, I want the people who read my work, watch my podcast, join my community. I want them to be people that I can meet in real life and be like, I would hang out with that person.
Yeah.
And that just comes through in like how you flow through your content and who you attract to you. And I don't know how big that market is. Certainly bigger than what I've captured so far, but it's not as big as what other people have done.
But it's big enough. And sometimes we have to let enough be enough.
Now we need to hear you say, this is American Idol.
This is American Idol.
There we go. You're hired.
That was good. What an
American
announcer voice you got.
I watch a lot of American Idol.
I said when J-Lo left, I left.
I haven't watched since like the second season. Is it even still going?
Oh yeah.
Is it really?
They just had their 20th anniversary this past like a couple months ago.
Well, they stopped it and then they came back.
Yeah, they came back to ABC now.
Did So You Think You Can Dance come back? I like that because that was like, you can't auto-tune dance.
I haven't watched that one. But Alan knows Justin Guarini.
Ooh.
And we're going to have Justin on the show. So I think that's funny.
Season 2 runner-up?
Season 1.
He was behind Kelly Clarkson?
Yeah,
He was behind,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Does he still have great hair?
He does. He still has amazing hair.
So random. Now we really have to get Justin was like, I'm moving in August. We'll do it in September.
we'll do it in September.
We've got to get the interview
Yeah,
gone.
we will.
And you'll have to remind me, as I don't want to tell it twice, but then you'll have to tune in, Jay. I have a funny American Idol story, but I'm going to save it for the Justin interview.
All right.
And then Jay will just have to listen.
Wow.
If you want to know it.
Wow.
Cliffhanger.
Jay, this has been so great. Thank you for stepping away from the conference to come and chat. I just enjoy you. I really appreciate how you lead by example, integrity and kindness, and that we can build from that.
Yeah.
So thanks for what you give to the world.
Thanks for
It was
giving me a platform.
lovely to meet you in person.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm going to try to tweet every day.
Great.
And still get back on that wagon and be out there.
Get back on there.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a verified badge. You've got to
Right?
You've got to do it.
Right. I guess it's part of my obligations to the social verse now.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. I think Jay is such a fascinating person.
So interesting. I always initially, not anymore, but initially was like, oh, if you're going to become popular, get a following, make it, I put in air quotes, you got to be an extrovert. You have to be comfortable speaking in public. And he is one of many people now that we have talked to and that I've talked to in so many different aspects of life that don't do it. I guess what am I trying to say? Is that you don't need to be an extrovert to be really good at it, but they've gotten in this position where they are able to speak and present and teach because they followed what they love to do, not just have a love for speaking.
Well, I think the digital virtual world helps with that.
Absolutely.
Because you're behind a screen. But I really love this idea of public failing, this approach of it. Like, I'm going to do this out loud and publicly, and if I screw it up, everyone's going to see it and it's all going to be fine. versus I'm going to do it. I'm going to fail quietly, and then I'm going to have to just sit with that shame and nobody knows.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
I don't know how do you fail publicly? I mean, do you just say, all right, I'm going to try to build a TV now and then document it. And then when your TV ends up looking like a refrigerator, you're like, oh, I guess I messed up.
Well, I mean, I think for Jay, he's built communities. He built Tweet 100. I think it went from the Tweet 100 group to Creative Companion to now it's the Lab. What was fascinating to me, he said, I'm gonna fail publicly because then I won't. And I think what he means by that, I tried to sort of pull that out of him, but we'll see. So Jay, when you listen to this episode, did I get it right? I think what that means is if you're really authentic and vulnerable and you're building publicly, it's all just a process. There isn't really failure because you're trying, you're learning, you're showing up, you're trying, you're learning, you're showing up, versus I'm going to sit back here on my own. I'm going to build this whole thing. And then if it doesn't work, boy, I fucking failed.
I interpreted it completely differently. And Jay, if you're listening, let me know if I got it right.
Yeah.
That I think it means that he is publicly committing to something so that he is being held accountable.
Definitely, there's definitely accountability. I agree.
And therefore, the people, knowing that he has made an unofficial promise to an undisclosed, unknown amount of people who are now expecting him to finish, now that's the pressure, not pressure, but the drive he needs to allow himself to continue and finish.
Yes, I think both. I think what you said and what I said. I know there's an accountability piece, and I heard that. I mean, Tweet 100 was, I want to tweet every day because I know that'll serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, how about I do this out loud and see if anybody wants to join me? And I think then he complicated the process, but it worked out really well for him.
Well, you took your answer and my answer, so you sort of cheated. So you're going to win no matter what.
I get to win.
You get to win no matter what, but yeah.
Yes. I'm glad we both understand how this relationship works, Alan.
How can they find us online, Heather? How can people... What?
We're so easy to find. You can find us on Instagram. You just have to go to Was It Chance on Instagram.
On the Instas.
And follow us. Send us a DM.
Do you know? I say like burb. When I'm going somewhere, I'll say burb. BRB.
Well, so we've had this. Our very first interview with James Harkness.
Mm-hmm.
I said that my kids say "lol" instead of laugh out loud.
Lol.
You should find. Can we pull up that clip and fit it in right here? Because then James goes very deadpan instead of just laughing.
All right. Well, if I can find it, here it is.
She was just pronouncing LOL. And I'm like, wait, who does that? She's like, that's what we all do. I'm like, y'all say lol? And okay. Sorry.
Instead of laughing. Instead of just laughing.
Our website is wasitchance.com. And our email is wasitchancepodcast@gmail.com. And we actually want to hear from you, right?
True that. Yeah, we want to hear how you are embracing chance, what opportunities you have embraced to create your success, to find success and manifest your own creativity. I messed that up so hard.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, based on this conversation we've had today with Jay, which was so lovely, how do you like to fail? Because we're going to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you bring it in and then learn from it?
Tell us how you like to fail.
All right, we want to hear about that. Folks, you've been listening to Was It Chance? We're the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Heather Vickery.
And I'm Alan Seals.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.